the session. If you are not the speaker, if you have any questions during the presentation, kindly type them into the chat box and it shall be addressed by the end of the presentation. So, to begin with, let me call upon our very dynamic Vice Chairperson, CA Santosh, to deliver the welcome address. Over to you, CA Santosh.
Thank you, CA Radhika. Good evening, members and guests.
I believe, Radhika, you are logged in through two devices. That's creating this echo. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's echo. Yeah.
Okay, I think, can you log out from one?
Just mute the other one. Just mute it off.
Okay, yeah. Honorable Chairperson of BCICI, C. Ajay Kumar, Chief Guest Abbas Al Radi, Chairman Bahrain Accounts Association, our speaker for the evening, Muhammad Ashraf, Senior Director, Corporate Affairs Key Point, Executive Committee members of BCICI, past chairpersons and Executive Committee members of BCICI, and our organizing team Key Point. Also, honorable members, I welcome all of you to this wonderful evening. We are very fortunate today to have Mr. Abbas Al Radi as our chief guest. He is a person always approachable and helpful for BCICI. In fact, he is our patron and he never telling no person. Whenever anything related to BCICI, he wholeheartedly welcomes us and does everything possible by him. I was making a futile attempt to understand what are the current position Mr. Abbas Al Radi was holding. I completed one page, still it is counting. That is the kind of dynamic personality Mr. Abbas Al Radi. He is chairman of multiple government body and different organizations in this Pearl Island, Bahrain. He is a person of immense caliber and help for us. I would like to welcome on behalf of BCICI Mr. Abbas Al Radi to this evening as a chief guest. Now, I would like to welcome our honorable speaker, Mr. Muhammad Ashraf. He is, I think, one of the very limited elite group member in notary services, and he is a very dynamic speaker and who joined Key Point from the inception. And also it is very important for us to understand the corporate law changes happening in Bahrain. I think after a long period, this may be the one time where a lot of transformative changes are happening to Bahrain companies law. And it will be a good idea for us to hear from Mr. Muhammad Ashraf. He is one of the very familiar face related to corporate affairs. A couple of more points I would like to bring the attention of our honorable members. BCICI is conducting an event, a family event under the by cultural committee this 31st of October, and we have communicated to our honorable members that you can also participate in that. That is a tribute event for the legends who passed away recently in the year of 2020, and I would request you to send your videos before 27th October. Therefore, it will facilitate us to do the arrangements and we can have a wonderful evening. Members, please do the needful. Now I will give the control back to Sierra Radhika. Please continue with the evening.
Thank you, Santosh, for those kind words. Today, we are quite honored to have our chief guest, Mr. Abbas Al Radi, who personifies versatility. He is globally recognized professional. Apart from being certified public accountant from USA and certified Arab accountant, he has gained MBA, MSB accounting, and many such qualifications from well-recognized international universities. He has 3 decades of professional experience in this field. He holds key positions and directorships in varied highly recognized organizations. To name a few, he is currently the chairman of Bahrain Accountants Association, board member and chairman of Audit and Risk and Corporate Governance Committee, and member of Nomination and Remuneration Committee of Bahrain Flour Mills Company. Now, with a huge round of applause, let's welcome Mr. Abbas Al Radi. Sir, over to you.
Sir, I think you're on mute.
It's been always a pleasure, and this is the time of the year when I meet with my fellow member of the Bahrain chapter of the Indian Institute of Chartered Accountants. I've been repeating myself every year, saying that you are the backbone of the accounting profession in Bahrain. Please keep the spirit up. I know the pandemic is affecting us all, affecting our lifestyle as well as our work environment, but I would encourage you all to keep up the best spirit. Dear member of the Bahrain chapter of the Institute of Chartered Accountant of India, let me start by thank you for inviting me to speak at this event. This meeting takes place in backdrop of the COVID-19 crisis. Most of the members must realize that these are unusual times. Please, this is very, very unusual time. This crisis challenged businesses around the world, not only us, not only Bahrain, not only India, it is around the world. Lockdown, travel restrictions, and social distancing are directly impacting our way of working. Many businesses will need to streamline costs and actually, when we come to streamlining cost, I always remember people link streamlining cost with firing. When there are businesses using the opportunity to hire, we as chartered accountant have a professional responsibility to advise our organization to take advantage of this. And rather than firing people, we will suggest to these people a very educated and organized cost-cutting programs that will provide management better advice to streamline their cost areas, such as procurement, supply chain, alternative and service provider, rather than firing people. By an education and a close look at all these cost centers, one will really make it much easier for the business to accommodate the effect of the COVID-19. As a professional, you can impart resilience and adaptability to your organization. To help this organization to navigate effectively through the pandemic, please do not advise your employer or your client to fire people. We really like you, and we really, Bahrain is a host country which is welcoming all of you and will support all of you. These are exceptional times, not only here, even in your home country. This event is very important event, touching down on a very important subject. This is one of the dynamic and the dynamic things about Bahrain economy and the Bahrain legal framework. Every day there are improvements, and the purpose of this improvement to make the country more easy to do business. And I really like your institute because working very hard to bring members up to date and to keep members abreast with the latest development. The new changes in Bahrain Commercial Companies Law has far-reaching consequences on allowing forms of companies to change, corporate governance, reporting, and many other interesting amendments. I will not go through these amendments because the speaker, my colleague speaker, will take them all in details. But I can assure you, anybody has any doubt or need more explanation, we have the summary here in Bahrain, Awa'il Bahrain. As well as on a personal level, I can provide you with my summaries and my thought of these changes. Please look into the benefit the Institute is bringing you by hosting this event or by convening this event. I don't want to take long of your time. I would like again to say it is very interesting and useful topics, and I invite you to ensure that you are attractive and to the way these changes are impacting you. I would like finally to extend my appreciation to the organizer and my sincere thanks to my friend Balu for inviting me and having you part of your event. Please take benefit of this and feel free to call me on any help, whether it's relating to this subject or any other subject. We are all friends and family. Thank you very much and good luck with this event. I am done, Rakisha.
Thank you, sir, for those touching, encouraging, and thought-provoking words by you. Now, moving forward to the most awaited technical session. The topic for the session is recent amendments to Bahrain Commercial Companies Law. In an effort to simplify the regulations of private companies and as a part of Bahrain's aim to develop its compliance and regulatory framework in line with international best practice, various amendments have been done to certain provisions of the Bahrain Commercial Companies Law. To help us understand these amendments with ease, we have amongst us a well-known expert in this field, Mr. Mohammad Ashraf. Mr. Mohammad Ashraf has been leading Key Point's corporate advisory function since the firm's inception in 2006. Due to his dynamic skill set and expertise, he is one of the most sought out advisors in Bahrain. The Ministry of Justice, Islamic Affairs, and Waqf has appointed Mohammed Ashraf as a private notary. He is acknowledged as a trusted advisor on the Bahrain Commercial Companies Law as well as other regulatory legislation. So, without any delay, let's join our hands in welcoming such vibrant personality, Mr. Mohammed Ashraf. Sir, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone, especially Mr. Chairman and MC, for the introduction and the brief on today's session. I'm in the office. I've just switched my camera on so everyone knows I'm here. I'm going to close the camera again as I'll be going through the notes. So if anyone can't hear me, please let me know and we'll just run through the session. So first of all, I can't express enough the thanks and gratitude to the ICAI Bahrain chapter for inviting me and Keypoint to do the session today. It is a great honor to take part in the session today. Going by the list of participants, I mean, there's many colleagues, many friends, many acquaintances, some people who I've come across, you know, over my years in Bahrain and while being at Keypoint. So thank you everyone for attending. I'll do a brief introduction to some of my colleagues who will be with me today, participating in today's session. If we can move on to the first slide, please. What? Thank you very much. So, I'll be leading the slides and the discussion for today. I also have on the call with us a couple of my colleagues from Keypoint, Mr. Nanda Kumar and Mr. Jitendra, who I have asked before this session to jump in and correct me if I get tongue-tied or, you know, I lose the path and I go off topic. So Nanda and Jitendra are on the call with us as well. And in the office with me in the room, I have Adila, Ms. Adila Naji. Unfortunately, Malak is studying for an exam and Mr. Nasser Ali from Keypoint has stepped in her place. I'll do a brief introduction to Adila. So Adila was a Bahraini graduate who joined us straight from Bahrain University. She spent several years with us, but during the several years, she's become an expert in the field of especially the commercial companies law. And she's worked very closely with the EDB, Central Bank of Bahrain, Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Bahrain Chamber of Commerce as well, on the changes which have taken place. And she has participated in some sessions with the regulators already. And also Mr. Nasser Ali has spent the best part of the last 9 years with Keypoint. He's a qualified lawyer from Sudan, who was working as a corporate secretary in corporate affairs matters in Sudan. And he's been with us in Bahrain for this number of time as well. So I understand that we'll have a question and answer session at the end of the slides. But look, if anyone does want to jump in at a particular point on any of the slides, then please feel free to do so. In order just to give you a brief on the structure of today's presentation, so we'll try not to take too much of your time and we try to summarize it as much as we can. There are a lot of points which will require in-depth discussion, and some people may have more of an interest in particular matters and others in other matters as well. I mean, at the end of the day, I think a lot of people on today's session are market leaders, and you basically control what should I say? This might be a bit of an understatement, but I say at least you control 95% of all finance departments in most of the institutions on the island today. So I expect that there'll be different requirements and different questions and different areas of interest from different people. So we'll look at the company structures, and we'll look at this in two ways. We'll look at it in terms of what they look like before the changes of the commercial companies law, the recent one, and how they look today. We'll touch upon the main areas of change with the legal structures. We will touch upon some of the subject matters which generally raise discussions or have raised discussions and things that have been requested over a number of years. We'll have frequently asked questions, which we would go through before the question and answer session. And then it's just a slide on key point. So if we can move on to the first slide or the next slide, please. So where were we? What we're illustrating here, look, we're all familiar with three of the legal structures in Bahrain: closed joint stock companies, with limited liability companies, and single person companies. And what we've done is we've taken key features of these three legal structures to demonstrate where we were previously. So number of shareholders, we had two categories, I'd say. The only category where you could have one single shareholder was a single person company. And of course, for CBB regulated entities, that's never an option. So we were only left with joint stock companies, be it closed or be it public. In terms of minimum share capital requirements, the only legal structure which required a minimum share capital requirement was closed joint stock companies. So as BD 250 was the minimum requirement according to Bahrain Commercial Companies Law. Now, some of you may say for WLLs and single person companies, there used to be 20,000 dinars and 50,000 dinars. However, this change took place last year. So in terms of nominal value, we always had BD 50 for a single person company, limited liability companies, and of course, joint stock companies had a minimum of 100 fils. And of course, with exemption, there was sometimes a lower requirement than even 100 fils. Liability, generally, we all know for all legal structures in Bahrain, liability was always limited to the percentage of shareholding or the contribution. There was always this gray area for single person companies, which, you know, it was very difficult for one to prove in court, but the promoter could always be held personally liable in instances of fraud, negligence, and where there was big issues with the company. Management structures for WLL and single person companies, there was always the option to have one single managing director or a board of managers. However, closed joint stock companies or joint stock companies must always maintain a board of directors. We can go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of reporting, I think over the years, we've always seen that reporting has become the same for all types of legal structures. So everyone has always needed to appoint an external auditor, especially over the last 3 years, where the ministry has enforced this on the companies, whereas previously they were a bit more relaxed. In terms of annual compliance, it's visible from the slide that joint stock companies have always had a higher regulatory involvement, and the compliance requirements have always been that much more higher than for limited liabilities and single person companies. Okay, so can we go on to the next slide, please? So the previous two slides were an example of where we were. So the last amendment, which was introduced by the Ministry of Industry and Commerce and was passed by a royal decree by His Majesty earlier this month, brought about some significant changes to the current commercial companies law. Now, I think this would also be a good time to note that in the last 5 years, there's been 6 amendments. So 6 sets of changes to the commercial companies law. So while there might have been some changes which took place in 2014, it's quite visible now that with the recent set of changes, those 2014 changes were all leading up to where we are reaching currently on the regulatory platform in Bahrain. So now what's happened is one of the most, what shall I say, one of the biggest changes that we've seen since this version of the Commercial Companies Law, which was issued in 2001, is that the amendment, which was issued in October, has removed single person companies as legal structures in the Kingdom of Bahrain. So the chapter on single person companies has been completely deleted. The description of single person companies is no longer in the definition of Article 2 of the Commercial Companies Law. So what's really happened in essence is that WLL or with limited liabilities companies have come to the forefront. So if we look at the simple example of previously, a limited liability company must have had at least 2 partners with a maximum of 50. So with the recent amendment, a with limited liability company can now have 1 partner, either an individual or a corporate, and there is no maximum limit. So now it's unlimited. So that's one thing that's taken place. The second, in terms of the minimum share capital. So the minimum share capital for companies was actually removed in 2018, the amendment in 2018. But what had remained was the nominal value of the shares. So let's say, for example, you'd have a WLR company, 2 shareholders, 1 share each. You'd have a share capital of BD 100, sorry. Today, there is no requirement to have 100 BD as a share capital. The way the law has been amended, it could simply be 100 fils as a share capital. Now, with this comes its own practical issues. And the practical issues we'll touch a bit further on in today's session. Extent of liability. So there was always this gray area with single person companies that the liability was not truly limited to the contribution of the partners. So with the change taking place and limited liability companies being the only, let's say, form of legal structure where you can have 1 shareholder, what we've seen now is it's cleared up the ambiguity in terms of liability. Management structure. A limited liability company can still have a management structure of 1 single managing director or a board of managers. So there's just a slight correction that I have on so where we talk about minimum number of directors, by error, I seem to have removed, so it should read 1 managing director or 2 or more board of managers. So we'll just send the updated slides after the session. So just to be clear, a limited liability company can have 1 managing director or a board of managers. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Okay, in terms of reporting, so the reporting of financial statements still does exist for limited liability companies as well as for joint stock companies. That's something that has not changed. In terms of annual compliance, so before we go into annual compliance, I'll just touch on a couple of recent issues when we talk about reporting. So all of us are aware that there has been some changes over the last 1 year, I would say, if not more, in terms of reporting. So all legal structures have seen the economic substance requirements, which have, been recently introduced into Bahrain. So CBB regulated entities have 1 form of reporting of economic substance, and then the Ministry of Industry and Commerce has taken a category of 17 to 19 commercial activities which have to report economic substance requirements. The other introduction of the corporate governance officer. Now, the corporate governance officer was an introduction which took place with the corporate governance code in 2017/18. And this is something, which has only been there for joint stock companies, be it public or closed. Again, CBB requirements are much more higher than the Ministry of Industry of Commerce requirements. Recently, and the most recent reporting change has been the disclosure of the ultimate beneficial owners. And, I think all of these steps or all of these recent changes, I think we've all seen do exist in other parts of the world. And some of us may have said, okay, so why were they not in Bahrain before, or why has it taken Bahrain such a long time to introduce these things? I think it's very important to understand the reasoning behind Bahrain doing or taking some of these steps. I think one of the important things to note is that I think during the course of last year, the FATF requirements in Europe listed Bahrain as not on the blacklist, but the grey list, as they'd say. And they asked Bahrain to undertake a number of steps to, position it in a different light compared to the Cayman Islands and the Jerseys and the BVIs. And all of these requirements we're seeing in terms of ESR, the UBO, corporate governance officers, having to produce audited financial statements for all legal entities in Bahrain, is all working towards having a better regulatory landscape in Bahrain, which differentiates it, let's say, from some of the other low non-tax jurisdictions. So, with reporting, we've seen a lot of changes happen very quickly. When UBO was introduced as a requirement to make disclosures, the Ministry of Industry and Commerce advised us that the disclosures would not hold up any applications with them. However, on the Sigilat system, it automatically became mandatory to address the UBO issue before being able to carry out any transactions. So, we have to work with the regulators in line with their requirements to give them their comfort levels to move forward. Which will take me on to the annual compliance requirements. So, financial statements is something which must be disclosed for all legal entities in Bahrain. And these must be filed with the Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Tourism, and of course the Central Bank of Bahrain for regulated entities. Corporate governance code must be complied with for all non-CBB regulated entities. And of course, the CBB have their own guidelines when it comes to reporting on corporate governance. Annual general meeting requirements for closed joint stock companies exist. And of course, the invitation to the Ministry of Industry and Commerce and the Central Bank of Bahrain, as well as other participants in the general meetings, is fundamental. In terms of limited liability companies, today, we only have the requirement to file the audited financial statements annually. So there is no corporate governance requirements. In terms of general meetings, yes, some very well structured limited liability companies do have annual general meetings every year. However, the law also gives them the ability to pass partners' resolutions signed by all the partners approving the same agenda items as they would in, let's say, an AGM. So in terms of constitutional documents, I think this is something very important to know. So with limited liability companies previously always had a memorandum of association. Now, with the change of having one shareholder, be it a corporate or individual, being allowed to register a company, they have changed the constitutional document slightly. So if there is a limited liability company owned by one corporate or one individual, the document will now be known as a declaration of incorporation. What will a declaration of incorporation cover? It should cover, and it will cover, all the provisions that the previous promoter's declaration and articles of the SPC company used to have, as well as additional provisions allowed for limited liability companies under the Commercial Companies Law. Any company which is registered with 2 shareholders or more will always have a memorandum of association. So now there's 2 forms of constitutional documents for limited liability companies. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So the previous slides, we illustrated changes which were visible amongst all of the legal structures. Now, this slide in particular, we will touch on some of the matters which are of particular interest and have become of particular interest to different groups, different organizations, and different businesses. So the first point is the issue of transparency. Transparency is something which is now globally recognized, and it seems to be the topic on everyone's it seems to be the topic with everyone's compliance teams, risk teams, and even board of directors. Transparency around the world has become a fundamental subject. And one of the things we've seen in the last amendment to the Commercial Companies Law is that all the board of directors reports for closed joint stock companies, public companies regulated by the CBB, non-regulated by the CBB, must disclose individual remuneration for each director, explicitly mentioning the benefits, as well as the benefits and shares received by executive management. Now, previously, there was always a club where the director's remuneration would be mentioned. There was not a specific divide, let's say, in the board report, which would go through these matters in detail. And certainly for the executive management, it was something which was non-existent. Today, it's still very early to say how the Ministry of Industry and Commerce and CBB are going to be viewing the new Board of Directors reports, or shall I say the Board of Directors reports, which will be used for financial years ending 2020. If one reads the rules blindly, it's simply, they would read it, say everything has to be disclosed, from the number of meetings they've attended, to the sitting fees they received, to the number of committees they sit on, as well as detailing executive management pay and any other benefits they receive. So of course, with this, there's come a number of questions. And I think some institutions are going to try and be creative in terms of how transparent they can be. Another key change, which is very, I would like to say, very interesting, and perhaps some would say overdue, is the forms and the way that capital for joint stock companies can be increased. So previously, there was always a notion that it must be a cash increase, or there'd be a conversion of shareholder contribution. And there was always some creativity around in-kind contribution also. In-kind contribution was always that much more challenging, because the Ministry of Industry and Commerce would only ever, in most instances, take real estate as being a valid form of in-kind contribution. Now, there were several reasons, and there are several reasons. One of the reasons is the fact that the Land Registration Bureau in Bahrain does an excellent job of tracking all the, should we say, rates of real estate all over the island. So, there was always another regulatory body for the Ministry of Industry and Commerce to rely on in terms of valuations. That being said, valuers have always had their own licenses, similar to the auditors, where their valuations were always taken on record. So what we've seen now in the last change is that the other forms of increasing capital, one has been to convert loan to equity. The second is convertible debts, which is perhaps in line with the introduction of a strategic partner, which we've mentioned later on into the slide. But one would assume that converting a debt, if I'm a strategic partner, I should be able to enter a strategic partner, as well as converting my debt to increase the capital. And of course, lastly, in-kind contribution is now going to have a wider definition, which we expect will be detailed in the implementing regulations, which are yet to be issued by the Ministry of Industry and Commerce. Preference shares is a topic which has now specifically been mentioned in the Commercial Companies Law. Bahrain was always very shy when it came to things like preference shares, because there was a twofold effect. Number one, the regulations were not there to govern preference shares. Number two, there was always a notion that only CBB regulated entities would be sophisticated enough to have a form of preference shares. And, there was always the added value from Central Bank of Bahrain. What the recent changes to the Commercial Companies Law have done is they've made preference shares available for all, let's say, joint stock companies, even those that are not regulated by Central Bank of Bahrain. So this may be applicable to certain trading companies, family businesses, and a whole host of other activities, other companies which carry out a number of activities other than those regulated by Central Bank of Bahrain. Delegation of powers. So the law has become clear to specifically mention that the chair or the chairman can only delegate the responsibilities or their responsibilities to another board member or a member of the executive management. Previously, this was there. Some people may say, but a chairman could always delegate authorities previously. Yes, they could. However, the mechanism and the process of doing so was not clearly documented, as it's become now. Audit committees. Many of you would know that during 2017/2018, with the introduction of the Corporate Governance Code by the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, there was a provision in the code which allowed audit committee members to be non-board members. Now, what we've seen in the recent amendment is that audit committee members must be members of the board. However, I think it's fair to say, and we have to be clear about this, that all boards can still always appoint external experts or independent experts, however they view them, to assist with functions. So it's surprising to see that 2 years ago, a code was issued saying you could have non-board members. Now we've gone to a notion where there must be board members, but I think we have to be clear enough to say that external experts are still recognized to form parts of boards. I think many of us have gone through experiences when annual general meeting is approaching and the executive management will come, or the nomination remuneration committee bring to the attention that the board is up for re-election or reappointment. And there's always this last minute scramble of sending names to the shareholders, and that's simply what it was. It was and it is the role of the nomination and remuneration committee to receive the nominations of people and to go through their CVs to see how they'd be able to contribute to the company, to make sure that they'd be able to assist on the various committees. Now what the Ministry of Industry and Commerce has done in the law is that they've specified for any elections, there must be the CVs of the candidates provided, the expertise, as well as details of the amount of time people will be spending on the board. And this is something very new. I think the culture of appointing board members was, some institutions followed a very good practice. I think most institutions always followed a very good practice. And I think what the Ministry of Industry and Commerce has done here, because of some of the problems they've encountered over the years, they've decided to make it a more structured approach to receive less problems going forward. Employee share options. So many people would say employee share options is something that regulated institutions, i.e. CBB governed institutions, would be looking at more so than non-CBB regulated institutions. The recent amendment to the law actually allows references and provisions to be made for employee share options and schemes within the constitutional documents of the company. But this is for joint stock companies, not for limited liability companies. Strategic partners, I touched on strategic partners for the increase of capital. And then, of course, one of the interesting discussion topics has been the waiver of preemption rights. Now, this doesn't simply mean there's a complete waiver of preemption rights, but it does mean that there's now some flexibility to admit strategic partners when it comes to the preemption rights. A couple of other points which are worth noting, and I think are quite important maybe for this forum, as well as for general knowledge. I think electronic voting, I think, Mr. Abbas touched on, and during his introduction, he gave us an overview, and he explained all of the challenges and difficulties that we're all going through today, and we're all experiencing, not just Bahrain, but all over the world, with the COVID-19 situation. And I think we have to recognize that the regulators have been accommodating this year. I mean, if we look at annual general meetings which have taken place this year, both the Central Bank of Bahrain as well as the Ministry of Industry and Commerce have allowed electronic forms of meetings. So be it by Zoom, be it by conference call, Teams, they've allowed that flexibility this year. One of the things we've seen in the recent amendment is that electronic voting is going to be a matter which companies will be able to adopt. Now, the mechanism for using electronic voting will become clearer in the implementing regulations. Today, those implementing regulations have not been issued by the Ministry of Industry and Commerce. But what this will allow, one of the most important things that was not allowed this year was the re-election or the reappointment of board members. And the Ministry of Industry and Commerce received many requests to extend the term of the board for 6 months. And this is, of course, in line with the law. If I'm not mistaken, maybe 2 weeks ago or 10 days ago, the Minister of Industry and Commerce issued a ministerial order extending the term of all boards which were due for reappointment this year until the next annual general meeting. So, in terms of electronic voting, this is something we will receive more clarity on in the coming weeks and not months. WLR companies, a specific mention should be made that previously there was always the requirement to have a unanimous approval for all decisions to introduce new shareholders into the company or new partners. Now, the way the current amendment reads, or the latest amendment, 75% approval allows the introduction of a new partner into a WLR company. So we've seen a change from 100% previously to a lower requirement of 75%. Some of you may also have noticed and heard that there's also been an introduction of a new type of company, not a new type of legal structure, a new type of company, I think is fair to say. And that is for the non-profit companies. Non-profit companies, the easiest way to describe these is, I have to be careful. Even if I say charitable organization, it could be wrong, So I think the easiest way of me describing this is maybe, I think 3 months ago.
It's probably companies which are not established to
make profit. Yeah, so non-profit making organizations. So 3 months ago, if not longer, there was a decree issued by His Majesty allowing sports institutions to have non-profit making companies. So I think, this is all in line with, let's say, some of the football clubs, some of the youth clubs, some of the, let's say, charitable organizations, whereby there's money coming in from sponsorship, but there's not a profit being generated from that. Now, one of the most important things to remember for non-profit making companies is that the constitutional document must specifically stipulate where the money will be used and how it will be distributed. And if there's ever a change to how the money will be distributed, there must be a change to the constitution. The other very important point to remember for non-profit making companies is that the Ministry of Industry and Commerce could also take a view that they can distribute the funds how they deem appropriate. But again, this is all going to become clearer in what we hope will be the implementing regulations issued in the coming weeks. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Okay, so before we open up the floor to some questions and addressing the questions which the audience have, we thought that we would, just go through some of the common questions or the most most questions that we've been asked over the last couple of weeks. So, I mean, what is the legal status of SPC registered prior to the issuance of Decree number 28? In short, these have legally become WLL companies owned by one single partner or promoter. Okay. Now, many people say, okay, but what's the change? The change is the Ministry of Industry and Commerce is currently working through the Sigilat system and is automatically updating all names of companies which had SPCs to WLLs. So maybe some for a fact have already been processed, some are still being processed. However, once the process is complete, there's nothing which stops anyone who has a single person company going to the ministry and requesting a new CR. The CR will show company ABC WLL. Are promoters of SPCs whose companies have been converted to WLLs required to adjust their position? Today, the amendment to the law says that there's a 6-month period, which is, sorry, not 1st April 2020, it should be 1st April 2021. There's a 6-month period whereby the commercial names on sideboards, the letterhead, advertisements, company stamps, websites, etc., should be updated to read WLL. Now, does that mean that every SPC company has to go and legally update the constitutional documents today? No, it does not. What the ministry has said is when a company has an amendment due, that is the time where they would be requested to update the constitutional documents. Does the establishment of a WLL owned by a single person company require an MOA? We touched on this part earlier. You can have a memorandum of association or a declaration of incorporation. Is a court order required to remove a director if their name is mentioned in the MOA? No, it's not. A change to a constitution of a WLL company can be managed with 75% of the company's approval. Does the commercial name of a limited partnership need to be derived from the name of its partners? This is, an interesting change where the Ministry of Industry and Commerce has been more flexible in terms of names and says that it doesn't necessarily have to reflect the name of the partners, but it can reflect the nature, or it could be a creative name. I think creative was the word that they used. Can all joint stock companies adopt electronic voting in their General Assembly meetings? Yes, they can. More clarity will be based on the implementing regulations to be issued by the Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Tourism. When can joint stock companies use their statutory reserves? So they can use their reserves to increase the company's share capital, to cover losses, and to cover losses, of course, if they exceed 50% of the share capital, and the shareholders may resolve to distribute the excess to shareholders. What is the status of holding companies? Now, anyone who's read the law in detail would see that holding company as a description remains. So the chapter of holding companies remains in the Commercial Companies Law, but a holding company as a type of legal structure has been removed. Now, all this is a correction of the position. So holding company has never had a different form of legal structure. It was always in the form of SPCs, WLLs, BSC closed companies, but a holding company was more along the lines of a commercial activity. So there's been a change to the type of companies. So it's not in the definition of a type, but as a commercial activity, as a form, it still exists today. There are a number of other elements, but there's so much detail to some of these topics which raise continuous questions. And I could be talking for hours and hours. And I think, I've taken enough of your time while going through these slides. And I hope that I've addressed a broad enough spectrum to open up a forum for questions and answers. So I will hand over to Mr. Chairman and MC to address the questions and the audience, and we'll happily go through any questions which are being raised.
All right. Thank you, sir. We can take the questions. Okay, the first question, I think it has already been discussed. What happens if the WLL company is regulated by CBB? Then it is forced to have minimum share capital?
Yes, so all companies regulated by Central Bank of Bahrain must continue to follow the rules of the respective rule book and, of course, the laws of the CBB. I think, it's very important to recognize which types of WLL companies are regulated by the Central Bank of Bahrain. So, of course, you have a category 3 investment company, which can be a limited liability company. You have several types of activities within the ancillary services, which can be WLL companies regulated by Central Bank of Bahrain. And of course, you have 2 or 3 types of insurance entities under rule book number 3, which can be in form of limited liability companies. Other than that, when it comes to CBB rules, I think we must clearly distinguish that even the recent amendments to the Commercial Companies Law, where they've made changes, they've referred back specifically to CBB regulated companies to refer back to the CBB law and the respective rules of Central Bank of Bahrain. So the capital requirements for CBB regulated companies have not been removed or changed in any way.
All right. Next question is coming from Sushil Jain. Have they specified rules for in-kind share capital and preference capital, especially dividend on those valuations of in-kind capital, rights and obligations of preference shareholders?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Have they specified rules for in-kind share capital
Okay.
and preference capital, especially dividend on those valuations?
Okay, so what we're waiting for is we are waiting for the Ministry of Industry and Commerce to issue the full implementing regulations, whereby what we're hoping is they will identify each of the areas and they would provide a mechanism, because today there is no mechanism which is documented even for the existing in-kind process which is there. So, Mr. Sushil, with an open heart, the minute I have this, it will be on your table before anything.
One of the things I would like to add for the in-kind share capital and the increase, we have discussed with the Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Tourism about it. And because of the law, it specifies the increase as for joint stock companies only. But taking into consideration the nature of the WLL companies now are allowed to increase their share capital by injection in-kind contribution in it. So the in-kind will be including the WLL companies as well. Okay.
Next, who will be treated as strategic partner?
With the definition of the strategic partner and how is it defined in the law, they have told us that the partners which are able to actually provide, let's say, marketing and
who can contribute financially and strategically to the development and the growth of the business. So it could be a case that I could, Mr. Sushil is a close friend of mine, so I'm going to use Mr. Sushil as an example. Mr. Sushil could be running a company. Sorry, let me reverse that. I could be running a company for all intents and purposes, but Mr. Sushil could be an expert advisor who's contributed to the growth of the business, for example. Now, Mr. Sushil may have provided a loan to the company. However, I do not have a way of repaying him that loan, but I recognize the value that he has added to the company. So I could propose to the fellow shareholders that we introduce Mr. Shushil as a strategic partner twofold. Number one, because of the growth of the business, but also for him to, let's say, receive a number of shares to partake in the profit based on the contribution he's made. So, we're expecting clearer guidance from the regulators, but it is going to be things of this nature, and especially banks as well. I mean, we've all seen many projects where financial institutions have provided loans and facilities, and for some reason or another, the projects do not always go in the direction they're expected to, and the banks do lose out in some instances. So the strategic partners will also be those institutions that will come in and be able to guide the companies through, let's say, the challenges they have to take them out at the other end and add value to them.
And when it comes to the strategic partner, there will be a decree issued by the minister who will specify the rules and regulations and the condition of admitting such partner into any company.
Next question we have from Balu, sir. Can a single entity, even overseas, or a company be single shareholder for a not-for-profit company? Any specifics for memorandum and articles will be similar to current WLL company?
Okay, so in terms of I'll answer.
I'm sorry, sir, you can go ahead.
Sorry. So I'll answer this in two parts. In terms of who can be the promoter, okay? Today, the Ministry of Industry and Commerce has not issued clear guidelines on whether they will allow foreign entities, i.e. foreign companies, or non-residents. When I say non-residents, I say people without CPR cards, okay? I'm being very specific in this nature. And they have not today announced or said whether they would allow everyone to apply for a non-profit making company, or whether they will limit it to certain groups or certain individuals. So this is number one. In terms of the use of those funds has to be very specific, and it has to be documented in the constitutional documents of the company. So the memorandum, for example, must clearly specify where the funds will be, where the funds will be given or where they'll be donated. In terms of the constitutional documents, yes, look, if it's one, be it individual or corporate, it will be a declaration of incorporation. If it's more than one, then it will be a memorandum of association.
Okay. Next question we have is, has MOIC issued any clarification regarding extending the board term till next AGM? Does this mean automatically the term is extended?
Yes. So what they have done is, okay. So the minister issued ministerial order number 87. So ministerial order number 87, 2020, which was issued 10 days ago, allows the automatic renewal of a board term till the next annual general meeting. Now, on here, we have to be I'm going to be very particular here when I talk about this, okay? Number one, what we understood is that was an internal ministerial order. It was not, and it is not available to the public. However, what the Ministry of Industry and Commerce did, they published a paragraph in an Arabic newspaper 10 days ago. So not Tuesday of last week, Tuesday of the week before, or Wednesday of the week before. Based on that is where we became aware of resolution number 87 or ministerial order number 87 of the year. And when we did clarify with the Ministry of Industry and Commerce and Companies Affairs, they were very accurate in telling us that order applies, because there are a number of companies now going back to them who have had the 6-month period saying, what do we do with our board? So according to the reading, it is extended till the next AGM.
We have next question from Mr. Roy. Will non-profitable organizations come under the purview of MOIC, that is charitable organizations? Is there a defined list for non-profitable organizations? I think
So
this is
non-profit organizations or non-profit companies, okay, I'll be specific again. Non-profit companies that are WLR companies come under the preview of the Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Tourism according to the recent amendment. However, the Ministry of Social Development is still there. And the Ministry of Social Development is the one who governs today charities, non-profit making organizations. So even we are waiting to see what this transition would look like, and when we're clearer on how this will be, I think we would happily provide a written overview to the chapter for your record and reference, which you could share with your members, which give you some clarity on these points, especially for non-profit making companies.
The non-profit will be covered in the implementing regulations as well.
Yeah.
It's more of like.
So again, it will be part of the implementing regulations that we're yet to see from the Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Tourism.
Next, I see Mr. Aftab has raised his hand. May I know if he has some questions to the speaker? Are you there, Mr. Aftab? Okay, maybe I can move on to the next one until then.
Maybe I think if some other members have a question, then maybe directly we can ask them. That may be a slightly better option.
Yeah, you continue, Radhika. Somebody
Okay,
wants to
fine.
ask a question.
All right. Would the audit committee member as must-be board member not further deepen the issue of lack of eligible board members? Already the resources are scarce.
Sorry, Radhika, could you just repeat that again for me? Sorry.
Sure. Would the audit committee member as a must-be board member not further deepen the issue of lack of eligible board members? Already the resources are scarce.
Okay, so even I'm lost for an answer here, because we know the resources are scarce, and we know there are a lot of experts in the field. Now, I think this should be a step in the right direction with the experts themselves who are advising from the back, because there are a lot of experts in the field who advise and are not prominent and not seen on the board. I think now is the time where we should start to see some change. And it should open up the landscape or the ability for many of these experts to actually have seats on boards. I think one of the things, and I think this is a very good platform to talk about this on, is that I think many people on this, in the chapter and on the forum, have spent a number of years on the island in Bahrain. And they've seen certain institutions grow, they've seen certain institutions change, and they've worked with a lot of executive management in a lot of these organizations. And there will be a demand to see independent directors specialized, especially in the field of finance. And this is something which, I would strongly encourage, especially the more experienced members on this forum, to make themselves available for institutions in Bahrain, whereby there is a need to have experts and independent members, and maybe not shy away from the role. And now is perfect time to, say, okay, we're available. We have the expertise. We are the experts. We can contribute to the landscape and the development in these areas. So it would would be a good thing to consider.
We have next question from Mahesh sir. What is the requirement of a compliance officer for entities? Do they need to have any specific qualification? Can you touch upon the practical issues due to the elimination of minimum share capital requirements?
Okay, so we'll take this question in two parts. We'll take the compliance, corporate governance. Is it corporate governance or the compliance? Corporate governance, right?
Compliance officer for entities.
Compliance officer. Okay, so I'll take the compliance officer as one, and then what was the second? The minimum share capital. Okay, yeah. All right. So, in terms of the compliance officer, who has to have a compliance officer today? I think we all know CBB regulated entities by default must have compliance officers, and of course, Central Bank of Bahrain go through their own fit and proper testing and an application process for the compliance officers. As far as it goes for non-regulating companies with the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, the only legal form and legal structure which is required to have compliance officers is joint stock companies, closed and public. And of course, exempt companies, which we probably have around 35 of today in Bahrain. Now, what's the role of a compliance officer? The way the Ministry of Industry and Commerce have defined the role is that there's an annual report which should be provided to them, as well as an annual reporting requirement in terms of an application form with the contact details of the compliance officer. Compliance officer has a duty and an obligation to report anything which seems to be suspicious in nature in terms of the activities the company is conducting. Who would they report it to? In this instance, it would be reported to the Ministry of Industry and Commerce. Today, have we seen a great deal of emphasis by the Ministry of Industry and Commerce on how they deal with compliance officers for non-regulated companies? No, we have not. But again, we expect that this will change in the coming years with the regulations coming together. So that's number one. In terms of so one more thing I should just mention. In terms of the qualifications and experience, the Ministry of Industry and Commerce do not have a clearly written, let's say, set of guidelines where they would approve a compliance officer. But for Bahrain registered companies, the compliance officer must have a local residency and a local CPR. That's by default one of the requirements. Moving on to the practical issues of having companies with no or a very low share capital. I think many of the people on today's forum are bankers or have worked in banks in the past. One of the biggest challenges that we face with our clients is that even a company which has a share capital or proposes a share capital of 5,000 Bahraini dinars, most of the banks on the island do not open the bank accounts for various reasons, because of the due diligence, because of the due diligence, because of
those who are not speaking, can you go on mute, please? Thank you.
So the challenge is with the banks, they don't want to open the under formation bank accounts, and they have their own reasons as well when it comes to due diligence and compliance and other such matters. Even 5,000 BD is not easy to open a bank account with 5,000 BD. But what surprises me, and I'm saying this now from a personal perspective, not a keeper perspective, and away from this discussion, what surprises me is the number of companies we actually see now. I get many requests on the table sometimes for companies that have a share capital of 100 dinars. It puzzles me. It puzzles me in many aspects, because you see a shareholder contribution of 10,000 dinars, but you see a paid up share capital of 100 dinars. And these are the same companies that want to do joint ventures in projects that are doing millions. So either I've got something really wrong in my mind, or the banks have a different idea in their mind, or the regulators are pushing something completely different from another direction. So the other thing with low capital is that there are a number of people who register companies today in Bahrain with 100 BD or 50 BD. They do this for visa purposes, and we see it. There's so many commercial registrations today. And I think the question comes of how many of these commercial registrations are actually conducting a business. So the practicalities of minimum share capital, they're vast. And I think if we don't see the effect of it today, we will certainly see the effect of it in the coming months and years to come.
Next question. Currently, the board remuneration and executive compensation is reported as part of financial statements with reference provided in corporate governance report for listed companies. Now, is this required to be part of board of directors report? What is for it in the new amendment?
According to the new amendment, there must be a disclosure in the board of directors report of the director's remuneration as well as the executive management remuneration.
It's all amounts.
It's all amounts paid to the directors and to the executives. Today, it's too early for us to describe the effect it will have on the board of directors report and what the board of directors reports will look like for 2020. We expect that the ministry will issue some guidance to the auditors, as they have done with corporate governance in the past. But as of today, we're waiting to see the clarifications in the implementing regulations, as well as the guidance from the Ministry of Industry and Commerce.
Last
Next
couple of
question.
questions, maybe, Radhika.
All right. We have a question from Mr. Ajit. CBB licensed entities to follow corporate governance code as per CBB rulebook or MOIC?
CBB rulebook. In short, it's CBB rulebook.
Again, it's shares in kind question. I'll just quickly touch on it. While issuing shares in kind, is there any guideline for the valuation which need to be factored?
We're waiting for the implementing regulations to specify who, number one, which experts will be considered. Will it just be auditors or will it allow to be other experts in the field? But again, this should be clear in the implementing regulations.
What are the benefits of registering as a BSE closed company now compared to a WLL, since compliance requirements are much higher for a BSE closed company?
This is solely down to choice. Yes. This is solely down to choice today. But look, I think we should, give the closed joint stud companies the credentials that they do have. I mean, it's a much larger form of company in terms of capital, staffing requirements, reporting requirements, and of course, depending on the nature of the business, it's also something very important to keep in mind. Now, if someone is going to set up a small trading company to bring in two products, does it make sense to have a BSE closed company? Maybe not. But if someone is going to set up a larger trading platform, which they want to grow throughout the region and introduce partners to strategically and go to banks for financing, then a Bahrain shareholding company is probably a better approach. But it's solely down to choice.
Bahrain has been advocating a lot for women empowerment. When do we expect any regulations for minimum seats for women board members? Does some regulations already exist?
Adila, I'll let Adila answer this. Women empowerment, so.
Well, unfortunately, there is nothing yet. There is women empowerment in a lot of aspects when it comes to human rights, but when it comes to companies, nothing yet. Unfortunately.
I'm sure we all are waiting for it.
Yes.
Okay, last question. Will removing upper limit of members in LLC to convert into BSE lead to more bypassing of corporate governance code?
No, I don't think this is going to lead to a bypassing. And I think, I'm going to touch on one subject while you've raised this question. There is going to be a complete change to the audit laws in Bahrain. There's going to be a complete change to how auditors are going to be. So if the audit law changes, of course, with that, there are subsequent changes. Today you have maybe plus 50 audit firms on the island. There will be scrutiny placed on audits which have been submitted to the regulators. Now, no auditor is going to pass anything in the financials which looks like there's a bypass of any rules or regulations. And I'd like to believe that no one in this forum is going to be part of anything of that nature as well, of bypassing anything, to not meet one requirement as opposed to do another. I think it's very important. And as this is the last question, I will also leave, this answer open as well, in the sense that it's for everyone's benefit to try and comply as much as we can with the regulations which are today stipulated in Bahrain, because these are not just Bahrain regulations, these are global regulations around the world. And, when we may think bypass or not bypass, find an easier way to do things. Sometimes there's such an easy way to do things, but we overlook it. We as humans, we like to complicate things more than we need to. Sometimes it's such a simple thing that needs to be done. So I think I'd like to believe there will not be any bypassing, and I'd like to believe that there will not be a fundamental change in how people consider legal structures. But just keep in mind, there's always an answer and a solution to everything that is asked.
Thank you, sir, for this knowledgeable session and patience answering.
Thank you very much. If you may just allow me to thank everyone on the forum again for being patient and staying with us the whole time. Look, if anyone does have any questions or anything they'd like to discuss in detail, please share the questions with the chapter, and they always have access to us, and we're happy to speak to everyone as and when they need. But again, a huge thank you from our side for allowing us to participate today, and we hope we added some knowledge and we clarified a few things. If we didn't, we apologize, and we wish you all a pleasant evening and enjoy the rest of your session as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
You mentioned about your close friend, Mr. Sushil Jain, quite often. So I think probably he wants to say a couple of words back. So if Sushil, if you are around, if you can unmute yourself and speak.
Mohammed, thank you very much for a very good presentation.
Thank you.
I have known Mohammed for a number of years, maybe from the time he started with Keypoint. I would narrate one incident which...
Many incidents. Many
pleasant ones. One of my vice chairmen asked me once in a board meeting in a bank, who is this Muhammad Ashraf? Is he an employee of our company or our bank? And I had to educate him that about 85 to 90% of the companies created in Bahrain have Muhammad Ashraf's signature as the founding member in their constitution and their memorandum and articles of association. Because when a company or a corporate is created, usually we give power of attorney to Muhammad, and his signature is prevalent in 85 to 90% of WLL, BSC, and other companies in Bahrain. This is the incident I would like to share.
Thank you. That's a nice incident.
Thank you, Sushil Jain, sir, for those kind words. Moving on to the next segment. Now, before we move on to the vote of thanks, I would like to inform you all that please stay tuned. We have exciting quiz session at the end of the event. It is rightly said that no event can end without expressing gratitude. So, Honorable Chief Guest, Eminent Speaker, Dear members, now is the time to express gratitude to all those who have made this event a grand success. I would like to thank you all on behalf of the Bahrain chapter of ICAI for gracing this event with such great enthusiasm. I, on behalf of BCICAI, wholeheartedly thank our chief guest, Mr. Abbas Al Radi, for addressing us in today's event in spite of his occupied schedule. We would like to thank Mr. Mohammed Ashraf for enlightening us about such crucial topic. We would like to thank Tally, our annual sponsors, for their continuous support. I thank the chairperson, CA Ajay Kumar, vice chairperson, CA Santosh, and all the executive committee members for their untiring efforts in seamlessly organizing this event. And at last, definitely, I would like to thank all the participants of this event for making it a grand success. With this, I hand over the control to CA Vivek Gupta for the quiz session.
Thank you so much, Radhika. Good evening to all the members and I hope all of you are excited to have this amazing round of quiz. Being your quiz master, I welcome you on aboard and let me share my screen so that we can start our journey for the day.
Vivek, please tell us how to do this. We should see the alternatives in computer and then answer here, or how?
Sir, so you should have your phone ready with you if you have that, so that you can see the questions on the screen and then answer on the phone.
शायद बंद ही रखते हैं
We'll wait. Okay, just a second. We'll wait for one more minute and then we'll start our quiz for the day. So guys, join quickly. I hope you all must be excited.
Members are requested to put in their membership number so that we can identify. Otherwise, it will be difficult in case. Yeah. So your nickname should be membership number followed by first name.
As you all must know the rule of the games, you will be given 20 seconds to answer a question. And overall, there will be 20 questions in the game, 10 questions. Ajay, I think we can start, or shall we wait? 43
No,
people.
We can start. We can start.
I think, yes. Your first question is here.
ಆಯ್ತಲ್ಲ
Time's up. So out of 45, we got 13 answers right. Okay. Next question. Before moving, okay, so far the board is led by Mr. Shaukat. Next question is, what is the minimum number of directors requirement in BSc and WLL respectively? Four answers right. Wrong, apparently. So now the scoreboard is Mr. Naresh at first, followed by Samson and then Sushilji. Third question, Mr. Abbas Al Radi, chief guest of the event, is chairman of
accounts वाला
Okay. So still Mr. Naresh leads the board. Only closed joint stock company are required to appoint an external auditor. Is it true or false? Still, we got three answers wrong. So the board, now the lead is taken by Ms. Sampson. Which type of company mandatorily required to hold AGM? So 5 questions are completed, 5 more questions are remaining. The scoreboard is first one, Mr. Samsung, second, Sushilji, and third, Rocket. Next question, how director of the company can be removed? Quick, quick, quick. Most of them got it right. Scoreboard remains same. Moving to next question. Statutory reserve of the company cannot be used for which of the following? So there's a change in scoreboard. Say yes, Samson on the lead, followed by Naresh and Ekansh. So Ekansh is leading the board, followed by Samson and then Sushilji. Ninth question. Does the WLL owned by single person requires MOA? And does the name of company needs to be derived from partner? Time is ticking. The answer is right. Let's see the scoreboard. Again, there's a tough competition, it seems like. Now, following to the last question, which is the double point question. Who is the BCSAI Mentor of the Month? Just 4 seconds remaining and we'll get to know the results. So let's see, the third position is occupied by Mr. Ram, followed by, okay, Samson is a second, and the first position goes to Ajay. I hope this is not our Ajay.
It is. Am I ineligible?
Yes, Ajay, you will be. Should be. See, you are part of the organizing committee.
But I didn't know the questions. Okay, no problem.
Yes, apparently, yes, you are right.
Okay, no worries. It goes to the next question.
So the first position is held by CA Samson, second followed by CA Ram, and third winner will declare later, definitely. So that was a really nice quiz, guys. Ajay, Radhika, and Ajay, back to you.
No, I think that will close the session. So thank you, the team, for the wonderful session. Thank you, Radhika, for being an excellent MC, and thank you, Santosh, for the welcome address. Thank you, Sushilji, for adding in your personal touch into the session, and finally, wonderful quiz towards the end, finished by Vivek. And I think we had one of the highest attendances so far for a technical event. We were at the peak of around 135 people at the peak. And I really thank all the members. I think consistently most of our events have been, we have been having more than 100 members for attending each event. So I hope this trend continues. And I also hope this is a reflective of the topics that we are bringing, which is, I hope, value added for most of the members. So we look forward. I think next week we don't have a technical session. We have a family event. So let's have some fun next week as we close the health and fitness theme with some special activities next week. So until such time, I give a good evening to all of you, and as we get ready for the weekday. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.